Hello and welcome back to Arma 3 Mission Making in 15 minutes or less, and today we're going to be talking about objects, how they become entities, and how we edit their attributes. We'll also do a little bit about how to some of the basic controls beyond the UI tutorial that you probably would have seen as the first one, and we'll talk about getting into test your missions and how to get into the editor to do that. But first things first, let's talk about objects. So on the right hand side here you have the Assets tab, and under that you have the Objects tab, and these are categorized by faction for the things that basically do stuff, and then you have this one which we're starting on, which is kind of props. I'm not going to talk about objects and props, that's a separate tutorial, but I wanted you to see that there is something in there called props and tell you why I'm not talking about it on this one. And the reason for that is we're going to be focusing on the stuff that do things. And the objects that do things in there. So if you look over on the left hand side here on the Entities tab, you can see that where I've got some blue 4 down already, these chaps here for example, then blue 4 has turned white, but you can see op4 currently is greyed out. That's because there are no op4 objects in the game thus far. If I grab this chap from CSAT and drop him into game, you can see there that now op4 has turned white, and if I open it up you can see that I've got an entity in there called alpha11, and within the entity is an object who's an ammo bearer as part of that call sign. You will also notice that this first chap, that's if I drop in here and drop a second one in, you see this first chap's got a red circle around it, and this guy hasn't. And the reason being is the very first object that you drop in from whichever faction comes in, it will automatically make them the player and or playable, which you can disable or enable. Thus, if I now grab another one in, drop them in, you can see he gets that red circle again down there. So that's what happens when you drop in some objects for the first time, enabled you to do stuff and things. What else do we need to look at? Well, if we drop our ammo bearer down here and we've got one entity, I drop another ammo bearer down a little bit further away, I have two entities. But if I grab this auto rifleman for example, you can see where I go close to one of these entities, I get that light blue line, turquoise line. That is essentially allowing me to group these guys under the same entity, and you can see them added here. Let's say I want to add this guy into this entity, I can just right click on them, go to connect, group to, and then pick on any of the objects within this entity and he will be added to them. So that's how we group things together. If I wanted to select each individual, I can left click on them. If I hold down control, I can then start clicking all of them and adding them as we go along. You can also drag a box across. Be careful not to get in the entity indicator because that gives you a set of different options. But you can drag a box across here and you've got all of those objects. Finally, you can go over onto the Entities tab and select these guys individually, or you can select them as a group by holding down the Shift, clicking on the top one, and then clicking on the bottom one whilst holding Shift, and it will select all of them in between. So pretty standard, but that's how you get all your guys and the various ways of selecting different aspects of it. Let's get rid of this dude. Let's snuggle over to here. I'm just going to make this guy my player and playable before I forget, before we go into the next piece. Okay, so we can see in the blue 4 entities tab, I have a bunch of entities, and within each of those entities I have a bunch of objects. There are things that I want to do with this beyond grouping them together to change their behavior. That's kind of the whole point of Arma and certainly mission editing, is you want them to do stuff and things to bring the mission idea to life, if you will. And we do that, or we do elements of that, by adjusting the attributes within them. So let's take the first group, or the first entity here, for example, these guys over here. If I right click on this chap, I can go into his attributes by right clicking and pressing on attributes. I can go in there by finding him in the Entities tab and right clicking and go on attributes, or indeed I can double click and that will take me into the attributes there. The top one is normally thus. You can drop it down here, and in this one you can essentially change the type. So I don't want it to be that, I now want him to be deck crew, and you can see now he's changed to deck crew. And indeed, if I go into the attributes tab again, make him a gunner HMG, he changed into a gunner HMG. So we can change them there. What else can we do? We can assign them a variable. I'll talk about that shortly. We can also give them commands. Separate tutorial about commands, but this is where it goes in the init field. And in this one here, we've just given them all a command, do stop this, which essentially means that they will stay in this position here. You'll see these four guys stay in this position here and not move unless they are threatened. Whereas you'll see different things happen to these guys. We'll explain as we get to them. Further down the attributes list, you can transform. So obviously you're not going to make them bigger or smaller, but you can reposition them according to coordinates. You can do that as well by dragging them around. But if you've got a specific coordinate location you want or you have in mind, you can do that here. You can also adjust the rotation and of each of the guys as well. Object control. So if you want them to be playable characters within there, then you'll check the playable. Doesn't necessarily need to be in there. Role description is a descriptor there so that you can add, particularly for your playable characters, what they're doing, so that it makes it a bit easier to find them and when you're selecting them. Object states, I don't tend to mess with this in terms of the skill, the health, and the armor. That just stays as is. Rank has not too much bearing. It depends on who's going to command on each AI entity thereafter, but I don't normally mess with it. I'm not going to lie. I've never really had a reason to mess with it. Stance you will play around with depending on what you're trying to achieve. Certainly at the outset of a mission, but obviously you want the AI to be able to react dynamically. So this is not necessarily something you're going to have to enforce, but there are things that you might want to have them down. And in this case, we want them in all-round defense. So I want these guys kneeling, but I now want these guys crouching. So if I change this guy, go in here and make him lie down, and this guy, make him go lie down, brings us to our next point. So you can adjust the attributes of more than one person at a time. If I drag a box over these two, for example, I go into adjust their attributes and make them stand up. You can see they're all standing up. Okay, but if I take these two, you've got one standing and one laying down, go to attributes. You can see that this information here is grayed out with a checkbox on the right hand side. This is grayed out because we changed the skill. And these are grayed out, difference in rank and differences in stance. So where you've got more than one object selected and these elements are different, you'll see they're grayed out with a checkbox. But what I can do is press on this checkbox and press on crouch, and these guys now will both crouch. So you can change those attributes as well across the board. What else have we got on the attributes? A whole load of stuff. We're not going to look at all of it. We'll look at the key ones. We've talked about that. Object special states. So you might want to do things like stop people from sprinting and just maybe allow them to run. It limits their speed. Or indeed you may want them to be forced walking. We've got an example of that over there. We've also got one of the other ones that you might look at is ambient animation. Is jumping into whether or not they're animated, and this adds a little bit of immersion, and as long as you check can exit, then they will exit if they come under contact. If not, then they'll stay doing whatever it is that they're doing. We've got an example of that to show you. Other things that I tend to change might be in the object AI, so you might want to disable their ability to move, which means they are static, they can't do anything, or indeed you might want to change their ability to path, which allows them to kind of crouch or go prone, but keeps them in one position. Lacks realism in a lot of cases. However, in some instances, let's say you've got some enemy AI in a bunker and they suddenly run out the side of the bunker to go and lay down in the field and start shooting at you, well, that's unrealistic. So disabling their ability to path will keep them in that hard cover as you want them to and allow them to be suppressed and react to fire, but not run out into the middle of the open ground in some kind of weird maneuver that disregards the cover around them, and so maintain a little bit more realism. There are other ones down here. I'm not going to go into those in detail. They're covered where necessary in other tutorials. Just be aware that you can jump into the attributes, get down these lists, and as with anything, it's all about experimentation and start looking down. In particular, cover over the tooltips, and it gives you a bit more information about what they are. That's enough for that piece. What are we looking at here? Well, with these three entities, we've made some changes to all of them. So these guys you can see are in all-round defense. These guys are nominally in all-round defense. We're going to put them prone here. And this guy, you can take a knee. But what have we got? So this guy's on ambient animation. He's dancing. Somebody's forced walking. Somebody's had their ability to move disabled, and somebody's had their ability to path disabled. So we'll see how that impacts their behavior versus these guys who will stay in position because of the command that we've given them in the init field, versus kind of our test groups or control group. These guys will revert back to their default formation as soon as the mission starts. They won't stay in these positions here because we haven't given them the necessary instructions and commands. And that's an important point to note. What else? What other attributes can you change? Well, if you jump into this little toggle here for the entity has its own attributes. So you can change the behavior of the formation. You can change indeed the markers and various things. The only things I tend to adjust in the composition, so the entity attributes, is going to be the formation, their behaviors. Maybe I want them to walk, and I want them to be safe, and I want them to get into a file formation. That's what I want them to do. That's what they're going to do. Finally, is linking a bunch of stuff together. So if we go into this guy and go into his attributes, he has got a variable name, so I can give him, this individual object, a very specific instruction. And this guy over here, you can see he's also got a variable name. Where is that useful? Well, if I want something to happen to this guy, then but nobody else, then I kind of need to be able to specify it's just this guy here. And if we go into this trigger, the variable that we're looking at here is called dude, and essentially it will make this guy fall unconscious when any player, so a playable character, somebody with the player ticked, walks into the area of this blue circle that you can see, or cylinder. So we'll see that, and this guy will then fall unconscious. I've also popped down a game master, so on the system modules we'll have different looking attributes to the object. So if you open up something and it's like, hang on a second, this doesn't look right, well, you can see there that it says system. Here we've got object. Here it says system. So it differentiates the attributes that you're looking at. Let's jump in game and see what it all looks like. So to do that, you're going to go up to the top of the menu here and it says play, and hit play in multiplayer. And the reason that we play in multiplayer is so that it looks how it would look in the game that we're playing. In this one, we're going to click on this guy here. That's going to be who we're going to play as. Hit OK, and it'll get us into game. It will start off in the map, and this is the briefing map, and you can normally put some bunch of information here down if you want to for a briefing before you get into mission, but we're not going to do anything on that in this one. We're just going to jump straight in. Give it a second or two to load. And this is us now in game, and you can already see our control group are moving back into formation. So think about where they started, and they're now moving into their formation. Let's look at our guy in front. So remember I said as soon as you walk into that blue cylinder, and you can see I've marked it here in the map so I can see it with this helipad, this guy's going to fall unconscious. So in we go, and you can see he falls unconscious. After 10 seconds, he'll get back up again, and we'll see that. By pressing the Y key, I'm now in what's called Zeus Mode, which allows me to kind of zoom around and fly and do stuff and things. We can see here, this guy's dancing, he's under his ambient animation, and we can see here that these guys, because they've got do stop this, have maintained their position. They're not doing anything else. If I now drop in an effect, so an airburst of a 60mm mortar round, I should wake everybody up. Bad things have happened. It's not really helped. Let's put down a bad guy. There we go, we have an ammo bearer, face this way. Oh, he's been shot. So this guy stopped dancing. These guys haven't reacted. This guy can't move. This guy can path but can't move. This guy's forced walking. So you can see that just by changing those different attributes, you're getting different behaviors. Guys, that is it for this week's 15 minutes or less. And today we looked at objects. We looked at turning those objects into entities. And then we talked about changing the attributes to get different behaviors. And you can see here across the board, we've got different behaviors that are being constrained. I'm just going to make this guy go unconscious again because it's funny. Whoop, there he goes. Have a snooze, little dude. By changing those attributes, we're getting different behaviors from the objects that we're placing down in mission itself. Look forward to the next one where we're going to cover the props in a little bit of detail. Oh, he's back up again. Let's do it again. There he goes. We're going to look at the props in more detail. Sorry, messing around. And go through their attributes and look at a few different things because that needs to be a separate tutorial in itself. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Again, any questions, put them in the comments. Cheers.